All right, thank you everybody for joining. Again, as I said, this is Liberal and Conservative Colleagues, a conversation of differing views on practice. Um, we have I'm Rebecca Pale, Director of Mentoring and Community Engagement with the Colorado Office of Attorney Professional Excellence. And our panelists will be Judge Alfred Harrell, Jeff Whedon, and Faye Matsukage. A few housekeeping issues before we get started. We are in webinar mode, so we cannot see or hear the attendees. If you have any questions or you want to have any interaction on the webinar, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat, and I will be monitoring questions as they come in. And a recording will be available for replay on our social media channels later on. If you do have any technical issues, we won't be able to help you. But usually we find that if you log out and log back in, that resolves things. And if anything happens on our end, we'll take care of it as best as we can. So we'll start with introductions. Faye, would you like to go first?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me today. My name is Faye Matsukage. I've been practicing, I guess I'm going now on year 47 of practice. I was born and raised in Honolulu, so I offer that information because I think it has shaped my views on the way that we form our own perspectives on issues. I think the way that you grew up and the way that you were raised has a lot to do with it. I think we're all products of our own experiences, and that helps to shape our views. But I'm involved now in a business boutique firm, Doherty Crow Legal, and I am serving of counsel and still enjoying working with the entrepreneurs that I work with as clients.
Great. Judge Harrell?
Um, Good afternoon. My name is Alfred Harrell, and I'm a senior judge with Denver County Court. I retired from full-time judging in 2016. I had to retire because of age. As you know, Colorado Constitution doesn't allow us judges to practice full-time after we turn 72. The last 10 years, however, I've been a senior judge, so that means that occasionally I sit whenever called, and I confine my practice to Denver County Court. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. I've been a member of the bar for over 50 years. I basically have practiced almost a little over 50 years as a lawyer and as a judge. As a lawyer, I was primarily a courtroom lawyer. So I did an awful lot of trials, criminal, civil. I did juvenile matters, domestic matters, torts, and some probate. So my practice was quite eclectic, and over the years I have had a great deal of experiences with a lot of lawyers. I do a lot of mentoring. Some of my mentees are actually judges, other lawyers, and of course, law students.
Thank you, Judge. And Jeff, last but not least.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I'm Jeff Whedon. I'm a criminal defense attorney, a trial attorney here in Colorado. I do practice federally, mainly in the aspect of wildlife law. I do a lot of that here as well. I'm an adjunct professor at George Washington, and I have a degree in law practice management. And so, love being able to see both all sorts of professionals, but then also it gives me a great opportunity to work with so many different and varied individuals as students. So I'm very happy to be a part of the panel, and I appreciate you putting it together.
Thanks, Jeff. Before we get started into the questions, one more housekeeping issue or one more housekeeping thing. This does qualify for one general CLE credit, and I will put the course number in the chat in the last few minutes before we finish. So let's dive in. All right, building a foundation of professional respect. We often hear that our profession is becoming more polarized. Has that matched your experience in the legal practice? Judge Terrell, would you like to dive in?
Certainly. I think to some extent, yes. But I think the greater danger is not polarization itself. Lawyers have always disagreed. I think the greatest danger is allowing disagreement to become disrespect.
Mm.
During more than 3 decades on the bench, I saw excellent lawyers with widely differing political philosophies. The overwhelming majority treated each other with professionalism because they understood that our shared obligation was larger than our personal convictions. So, on the whole, we have to just be careful of disrespecting one another. And that doesn't correlate with agreement or disagreement.
Faye, would you like to chime in?
I would have to say, I think it has become more polarized. What I've seen is what I call hashtagging. I think we have tended to put labels on situations or people maybe too quickly, or in my world, I would prefer that it not happen at all. I think we're all the products of unique circumstances. And so to put a label on someone is unfair because that means that you're taking sometimes a rather superficial look at someone and deciding who they are. And so I dislike that part of the world that social media has brought in.
Mm. Jeff, any thoughts?
Well, that's a good place for me to start is with social media because I couldn't agree more that social media and the dominant media generally, I think, makes our polarization seem even more than it is, and we are experiencing polarization. I'm not denying that, but I do really believe that the differences that we have are probably a lot smaller than the similarities we share. I don't. I'm disappointed to hear that there might be some disrespect in the courts and this and that. I've found that collegiality and respect between attorneys and between district attorneys and public defenders and that sort of thing. I don't notice a lot of that in court. The problem is, or maybe the opportunity is that we oftentimes don't know what the other person is or identifies as or what we have as a label that's associated with us. And I think that's good. When we do, that's when it becomes problematic, I think. My experience has been that, for example, there's a great deal of this sort of polarization built into even applications for things like becoming alternate defense counsel or becoming helping out in dependency and neglect court in a court appointed opportunity. There's a great many questions within those applications that make it very clear what's expected to be answered. A good example is that there's many questions not asking what you think about what you're doing to try to bring people together, what you're trying to do to help underserved communities, what you're trying to do to make us all get towards a more perfect union in some ways. Instead, it will say things like, what are you doing to promote equity? And I think that's a legitimate question. I think that it's perhaps an enormously important question, but it doesn't give anyone an opportunity who may say that I really want to spend some of my energy helping communities with equality and with equality of both opportunity and representation, merit-based situations. It's just baked into the cake the other way with those types of applications. And so someone coming from the outside, I don't believe is even going to be considered for those positions because they literally can't address the question in a way that would allow them to, in a principled way, talk about things that are important to them that I hope would bring us all together. So that's the only real polarization I've found is that there seem to be some structural and systemic things that make it so that attorneys have to label and have to identify, or they will not be given an opportunity. And I think that's unfortunate.
Mm. Thank you. So, how do you distinguish between someone's political views and their professional competence? How are you able to navigate that?
Can I start with that?
Yes, please.
Um, I don't. And I think that the good thing is, and I'm particularly interested in to hear what the judge would say with his seeing some or being concerned about the disrespect. I see it as entirely irrelevant, and I would be interested. I hope that's not an overstatement, and I hope it's something that we would all agree with. Is that my political, I'm sorry, my defenders, my public defenders are all usually on the progressive side, but they don't. It doesn't show up in court for me. They're, a lot of them, I think, understand that I'm relatively classical liberal and a political conservative, but I've been encouraged about how that doesn't impact us in court or in our negotiations. And if people are experiencing that, I would love to hear about that. It would be very discouraging to me because I like how people may be very different than me in what I'm thinking and saying. But in court, I don't feel any of that from them. And there's sometimes a description that prosecutors will have more conservative leanings. Again, I don't feel like I'm getting, I think people are, for the most part, advocating hard and calling balls and strikes. So I'd be interested to hear what other people would think because I don't have a lot of experience, thankfully, with that hurting us as far as decorum and respect and professionalism and how we advocate for our clients and in situations.
So the question is, how do I distinguish between someone's political views and their professional competence? I've never regarded political philosophy as a measure of competence. I evaluate lawyers by their preparation, their honesty, their civility, and their credibility. Uh, a lawyer's political points of view, that never tells me whether a lawyer would honor a commitment, accurately state the law, or tell the court the truth. So, my concern is one of competency and professionalism.
I think I would echo that. I work in the transactional sphere, so we don't really have very many, I would say, head-to-head clashes of any sort. It seems that we're both sides are trying to represent a client's interest in a transaction. Generally, the clients are there because there's some kind of objective to be achieved. And we're just trying to facilitate that. So the political views rarely enter in, but I think as Judge Harrell has noted, just the professionalism and civility mean a lot. The fact that the other side is willing to try to understand what you're trying to accomplish for your client. And so I think because we're so goal oriented in doing transactional law, that we tend to have um, maybe a more collaborative view on the practice.
Brilliant. Have you worked closely with someone whose worldview differed significantly from your own, and what made the relationship successful? Judge Harrell, you want to start us off?
Certainly. And I certainly have. But I think successful professional relationships, at least mine, I think, have been built upon mutual respect rather than some kind of ideological agreement. The law provides a common language for us that are in the profession. And if we share integrity and commitment to the rule of law, I think we can accomplish remarkable things, despite having, substantial difficulties. And so it hasn't been very difficult for me to work with people who don't think like and act like I do.
Jeff, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I won't say I echo everything that people said before me throughout this presentation, but I am, and I feel that. I just feel like the wisdom from the other two panelists is something that I want to claim as my own to be able to echo it. I do think that I find myself trying to go out of my way to find people and professionals that would be ideologically different than me. And the good news is that's not immediately easily identifiable, but sometimes you find that because I find that with the polarization issues with media and social media and some of those sorts of things, we're becoming so siloed. And I find myself often in my own silos. And so I have tried very hard to find ways to integrate people that I can identify as someone who might not be of my ideological bent, to make sure that I'm trying to be balanced and open. The judge mentioned just professionalism and civility and those sorts of things that should dominate our relationships. But I have found myself one exercise I recently did with an attorney is that we decided to exchange essentially news sources
Mm.
that I was, we were saying such radically different things. And I would say something, you'd say, I just haven't seen that. And I'm in the midst of I don't know what we would call it, some kind of ideological exchange where I am getting news from his sources and he's getting news from my sources. And it is eye-opening. And in a way that I'm not happy to admit as a panelist is that I didn't think I was being siloed. I'm not trying to be siloed, but it's very difficult for us. And so I like the idea of us really working very hard to try to bring people together as much as we can and at least hear people out. I mean, that's the only way it succeeds for me is to just not be talking and just be listening. They don't want to hear my opinion in the beginning necessarily anyway. And I'm the one who really I'm stepping in and saying, I want to drive this. I want to move this. And so finding people who disagree or who have a different idea and listening to them, and reading their stuff has been remarkably profitable for me and hopeful and helpful.
I think about an early work experience I had. I think I was just a teenager, but I was an office runner for this company. And I was working under the supervision of an older woman who had been there for decades. And she just one day said, you have to remember that the world does not revolve around you.
Mm.
You revolve around it. And so often I just think about that statement and, our own opinions are not the only ones there. And it does mean that we have to take a moment once in a while to admit that and believe it, and then be open to just hearing what other people think. And it does take, it takes a certain amount of effort to hit the pause button and do it. But I think every time that we do learn something. So it's worth our time.
Awesome. So, Faye, I'm going to pitch the next question to you. When conversations touch on controversial topics, what communication habits help keep discussions productive? What do you draw on as your skills as an attorney?
I try to bring the discussion back to the task at hand.
Mm.
I think if we're both focusing on what we need to accomplish for our clients, then we tend to move away from the exchange of just, beliefs on a broad scale, but just really talk about, okay, can we resolve this issue? How can we do this so that our clients can both walk away from the situation and be able to live with it? And I think when she can narrow it down to problem solving for the issue at hand, you remove a lot of the potential for broad disagreement. So I think it's also true, in our clients' best interest that we do that. We are, after all, hired by our clients to solve their problem.
Mhm.
And I think we just need to remember that.
Judge Harrell, do you have a follow-up?
I was just thinking about, any kind of conversation that you have with somebody who, may or may not think the way you do. And for me, I try to, and as a judge, you become a professional listener, first of all. So I try to listen long enough to try to understand before I, try to respond or, try to persuade whatever may be the case. But, is it necessary for me to say something, first of all? I have to make that determination. And then I have to make the determination, is it true? Is the truth of what we're talking about, is that going to make a difference? And then finally, I have to make sure that what I'm saying is kind. I mean, I don't want someone to feel badly, or I don't want to maybe project on them something that's going on with me. So, I have to be very careful in that regard with what I say and what I do. And the other thing is, when I'm listening, especially when I'm having a conversation with my wife, she's kind of trained me on this one, is I can't be waiting for my turn to speak. I mean, I really have to be involved in listening and not preparing, my particular response, because I may get it wrong if I'm not listening. And so it's it's important to do that. And as a judge, one of the things, and I maybe sound like I'm oversimplifying this, that I've discovered, and no matter what kind of case is before me, is the bottom line is this: people simply want to know that they're being heard. That was kind of a revelation to me. It happened in a case where, I thought that, things should go a certain way, and I was ready to pronounce that. And this individual standing in front of me and says, "Judge, I just want you to hear me out." And I thought, "Oh, okay." He says, "It doesn't have necessarily anything to do specifically with what we're involved with here, but I just want you to hear me out." And I just sat back and said, "Okay." And it made all the difference in the world. And even though the decision that I made was, it wasn't very helpful to this individual, they appreciated the fact that they were allowed to be heard.
Just touching on some of the themes that have that the other panelists brought up, I think that being task focused is enormously helpful to be able to and to when the judge was talking about kindness and about respect and if you can be careful not to manage your own energy and to try to keep your energy one as that. You might not know everything. You do want to hear the other person because they may teach you something or show that you're on the wrong path or any of that sort of thing. Because I think that's not necessarily our first instinct as lawyers, is that we're wrong and that we need to let them finish everything. And we're preparing our next answer, the moment their mouths open, and that's not going to facilitate communication. It's not going to put us in a space where we can learn. It's or it makes it harder to learn. And so I love the idea of it. In my world, I really have to focus on saying nothing and listening and asking questions and not making statements. If I can do those two things, they very much help me manage my own energy. And I find it being so much more productive and being able to, first of all, hear things that I did not think were going to surprise me. I thought I knew it and I didn't. And it genuinely does surprise me. And I don't do any of that if I'm talking. And I don't do any of that when I'm preparing my next answer, and particularly making sure it's especially clever or devastating or funny or whatever it is. If I'm listening and if I'm trying not consciously not to match energy, unless it is kind, wonderful energy, the difficulty I think we face in so much of our lives as our lizard brains are so triggered so easily. And if instead we can think, I'm trying to get to the truth here, or we're trying to accomplish this task together. And if you can refocus both them and yourself, I think that that can lead to really good results for our clients and ourselves.
Great. Jeff, this is kind of a follow-up question. How do you disagree respectfully without damaging trust or working relationships?
Yeah, I can tell you the opposite, and that is that if I match energy, especially difficult energy, and if I top energy where someone is upset or angry or frustrated, that never ever works ever. No one is happy. No one gets the task done. And so um, I spend a lot of time. A book that was very important to me is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. And it comes down to the idea that we have two brains, and one is a lizard brain that was first to develop, and it's very quick, and it has to do with fight or flight. And it's good at that. It's good at fighting. And as attorneys, I think we need to fight all the time. Whereas the second part of the brain that developed so much later is slower and is superior in almost every way for real life, for what we have to do from our wives to the courtroom to every other way. And if we can slow ourselves down, if we can try to honestly and earnestly actively listen, to try to make more interrogatory statements than statements, I think that that's a wonderful way to try to do things that are very practical in managing how we get to a place where we can be listening and accomplishing tasks and showing respect and civility and kindness. That can only happen for me when I really slow down and I'm consciously trying to understand and listen.
Faye, do you have anything to follow up?
Yeah, I think, in those situations, I like to start off saying, I admit I could be the wrong one here. I could have the wrong view here. So I'm just really interested in how you arrive at that conclusion, if you don't mind explaining. Because I
Good.
think it acknowledges that you're not just that you are listening to them, that you're giving them the due respect for the fact that they formulated, their conclusion, their idea, their view. Um, and I think just wanting to learn and expressing that, I think it helps a lot into saying, I'm not saying I'm the right one. I'm just curious as to how you arrived at this, because maybe I'm just missing something.
I think when you do something like that, and I've done the same thing, Faye, is that I can I think I try to challenge maybe without diminishing the person expressing the idea. And so it's a delicate dance because you don't want to say something that is going to push them off or push them over the edge. So I'm usually very careful about that. I might say something like, "Huh, I hadn't thought about it like that." I mean, that's really interesting. Um, I have a tendency to do thus and so. That is probably the opposite of what that person has stated. But what you told me is pretty interesting. I think maybe I'll try that, or I might incorporate that somehow in the way I think or believe. You never know, but I try to balance situations when I'm in a you're over here and I'm over there. I want us to kind of try to come in the middle. We're not going to get there like this, but if we get a little bit closer to one another, I think we can really have a conversation.
So that directly leads to the next question. What role does curiosity play when someone sees an issue very differently than you do?
Oh, that's a major role. I mean, that means that if you're curious, that means that you want to learn. And I would hope that we as professionals are always willing to learn and not think that we know it all.
Jeff, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I really love the way that energy comes off from Faye. The being able to say, I want to, I have a desire, and I think a lot of attorneys do, to be right in like a capital R sense. Not that you're win the argument, but that you're actually seeing something that is accurate or true with a capital T. And if you think you know all of that, which I oftentimes go in, unfortunately, thinking that sort of thing, I'm not curious and I'm not asking, I'm not listening. And so for me, it's very intentional to be able to, and I don't have that word in my mind very often. I'm going to steal it, that curiosity, where you should be genuinely curious with the other person. And if you are, the rest of these things will flow out. I think you will ask questions and you will be listening because you actually want to hear. You're curious. You want, and I feel that sometimes just articulating exactly what these things are, almost like we would with kids. I mean, where you just say, I don't feel I'm, um, I don't feel I'm understanding you. We obviously are having difficulty here. Can you tell me what you're thinking? Can you tell me what you think I'm missing? And then sometimes, if you've already crossed the Rubicon of everyone being angry at each other, I will sometimes try to use humor with a little bit of phase energy, where you say, "Hey." It's quite evident that I might be the wrong or crazy one here. Help me out. What do you need in this situation? Where can we get back to where we need to go? But you definitely have to. I think that all of this takes us being mindful and thoughtful and careful, and that takes a little work, but it's certainly worth it.
So to follow up on the humor, Jeff, one of our attendees commented Ted Lasso's best quote, "Be curious, not judgmental," which is a great scene.
It totally threw me when I read it. You can't go better. I mean, we can all just quote Ted Lasso for the rest of the panel and probably win.
Judge Harrell, do you have a follow-up?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking about a situation that involved something that someone said, and my retort was, "Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I've never heard that before." And that opened up the floodgates, and just something to just probe someone. I didn't look at them like they were crazy. I didn't act like I was shocked. I just really came at it that way. Tell me more about that. And at the end of the conversation, I was like, I understood. I didn't agree, but I certainly understood, and that made a difference because I learned people sometimes just want to be heard.
So Judge Harrell, can you share a time when listening to someone with a different perspective changed or deepened your own thinking? You mentioned in that case with that party, even if it didn't change your conclusion.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who politically was, far different from my thinking. And they really weren't aware of, my political stance. But our conversation was over a period of, maybe an hour. Um, I mean, it was just the two of us, and we were in a situation where, you know, we didn't have anyone else to talk to. So we were waiting for something to happen, and we had this discussion. And this person had indicated, she was a doctor, and she had indicated that her aunt was one of the legislators in Colorado, and she was a Democrat. And I said something about the political affiliation, and she looked at me and she said, I'm really an advocate and devoted to Milton Friedman's thinking. And I thought, oh, free market. I thought, okay. I said, can you tell me? It sounds vastly different from your aunt's political position. She said, "Oh yeah, we don't agree, politically, but I love her and I'm glad that she's doing what she's doing, but I'm a free market person." And I thought, well, I need to think about that because I never had really looked at uh, Friedman's philosophy as closely as I might have. I think in economics, I think I probably uh, missed that class. So, so what I did was, after our conversation, I decided to do some more research, and read some things that Friedman had promulgated, and thought, I could understand how somebody like this individual that I had this conversation with would think the way that she was thinking. So I took from that conversation something that helped broaden my perspective. So it was a very interesting situation.
Faye?
When I thought about this question, because you did give this one to us in advance, I thought this is something I do all the time, at least for the length of time I've been married to my husband. We come from completely different backgrounds, to the point that I remember when we were first getting married, the secretary that was in my office who knew my husband said, "I didn't think you were going to last more than 5 years," because we were that different. But it's made our marriage, I think, much stronger because he does have such a different background than I do. His world, he was a farm kid from Idaho back in the days when women, all they did was do the house chores, they raised the kids, they fixed the meals. Then I come along in his life as an attorney, not wanting to change my last name to his, and having my own definite views on the way things should work in the world. And it's made for interesting discussions. And it's made us, I think, better people because we have made it a point to hear each other out. And that, I think, goes to Judge Harrell's point, which is hearing each other out, giving that other person that amount of respect for the way that they view things, to just listen to see what they have to say and why. And it does broaden my own thinking because I do realize there could be a view I have not even thought of just because of the way I was raised and the experiences I've had. And so when you listen to someone with a different set of experiences, different thinking comes into play. It is a good experience, and you just have to tell yourself, you're not going to get mad. You're there to learn.
I love those perspectives, both of them. And I really think this is kind of the secret sauce in some ways of this panel, what I was most excited about, because when I spent time thinking about questions that had been proposed and then follow-up questions I had, is that I never come away from one of these exchanges without being smarter. I never come away from them without being better, either understanding myself better or someone else better. And when I have that perspective, because there's a natural inclination for me to not necessarily want the confrontation or a potential of people disagreeing or conflict or that sort of thing. But when I think about it, I've either been taught something from the other person, they've shown me something I didn't see, they forced me to articulate myself better or change my mind. All of those are virtuous things. Those are all things that I want. And so why wouldn't I be running towards these opportunities rather than in some ways feeling like I need to avoid them? In with the politicization and the polarization and that sort of thing, even when I'm speaking to people who are just diametrically opposed to me, at the end of it, I really can usually, I find it what Judge Harrell said, where he says that he went out and did a deep dive on Milton Friedman. That sort of stuff is magical when you're like, I maybe don't know. Well, first of all, you're like, well, I'm not sure. I want to know. And then the second thing you say is, well, of course I want to know and I want to learn a little bit more. And I love that curiosity from him to say that he would go out and dig through some University of Chicago professor from 50 years ago and find out things where I would imagine there are things that you found that you were like, that's really interesting. Or you know what, that little piece of it, I totally agree. And that is magic when we can see that we have ways to have interconnectedness and the ways to get at both truths for ourselves and other people, that if we really are curious, if we're really are trying to actively listen, that it's a virtuous cycle. There's almost nothing bad that can happen from us finding ways to listen, accomplish tasks, and be better through this process.
Judge Harrell, how do you keep political differences from interfering with teamwork or client service or party service?
Well, being a judge, you're supposed to be not, especially in Colorado, we're supposed to be nonpartisan. So I never let politics interfere. I really don't. I mean, if someone brings up their politics, and it happens often in these times. I just I softball it. I mean, I don't let it rattle me. I know that if we get into a discussion, we're going to come to blows verbally, perhaps, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to play that game. So I avoid those kinds of conversations. And I've not been unsuccessful in that regard. So, for me, it's kind of the only people that I talk politics with are people who think like me. If they don't think like talk to them about politics because I don't argue too hard. You can't, if you think a certain way, I can't change your mind, and you certainly can't change mine. So let's talk about something that, is not going to cause any kind of friction between us. And you can inevitably find something to talk about where you can have a conversation. It can be a valuable conversation, a real conversation, and not just about the weather. But it doesn't have to be about politics. There's enough things going on in the world that people should and usually are interested in that don't involve politics. Now, that being said, I think Aristotle tells us that everything is political. So, and that's probably true.
Faye?
I think a lot of times when we're collaborating with others and it starts to go sideways, I think it's good to just bring it back by saying, look, we're here to solve the problem. This is your particular superpower. This is what I need you to contribute to the effort. And I think when you do that, I think then they start thinking away from their own beliefs, but instead to what they can contribute, what they can do to move something forward. And so it's sort of maybe changing the way that people are thinking about what's at hand. And I think to Jeff's point, it's trying to move it away from someone believing that they have to be right, instead to, hey, we could really use your efforts to accomplish this. So it's a different way of looking at your situation.
And the Aristotelian wisdom from Judge Harrell, it's both, I think, right and wrong in that I think ultimately, if you dig down deep enough, everything is in some way arguably political. But one of the interesting things, and I haven't explored it here and I haven't heard it much, and maybe it's because it's not worth exploring, but the politics, I have heard people just essentially, I think, if I'm restating it correctly, say that our politics are irrelevant to the practice of law for the most part, in my opinion. I do believe it influences. I do believe that having an ideological bent can give you attention and focus. But when we're in the courtroom, it's much more of what Judge Earl and Faye were saying, that functionally, that's not appropriate for us to discuss. Now, I'm a glutton for punishment, unlike the judge, who obviously is far wiser than me. And so I will try to talk politics, and in particular with people that don't agree with me, because it is fun to talk with people that agree with you, because then you're just all patting each other on the back. But I grow more, I learn more, I become larger, a bigger person, a better person when I'm actually engaging. But I think the judge would say, yeah, but I don't need to do that at work. And that's so true. I just don't know how much of this we need to do at work. We can do it over coffee or a beer together. And I think that would be a wonderful way for us all to grow closer and smarter and better and faster. But at work, there should not be polarization. We should not be clashing politically, in my opinion, at work. We should be very much focused on tasks and on results and end results. And someone will always come back to me with Aristotle and say, no, 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 it will always ultimately come down to politics. But I'm not sure functionally if that's true. I think in the courtroom, we need to be what the other two panelists have said over and over again. We need to be listening. We need to be kind. We need to be respectful. We need to be prepared and civil and professional. And if we have those things, I think that would solve so many of the issues that we're concerned about on this panel.
So Faye, despite differing political philosophies, what values do you think lawyers generally share?
I think we like people. If we wanted to just research, write in a vacuum, I don't know if we would be attorneys. I think it's the fact that we truly do enjoy being with people, helping people, and being part of a process larger than ourselves. And I find that in common with other attorneys that I work with. I feel that we are all very naturally curious and wanting to learn. This is something that drives us. But I really do think being able to interact with people is the number one thing I see that attorneys really enjoy doing. And if you're going to interact, then I think you're going to find a way to do it productively, to make, the moment after you leave better than the one that started before you got there.
I agree with that. And I think that lawyers, regardless of their ideology, generally value concepts such as justice, due process, competence, and the rule of law, almost without exception. I find that, we have that common ground and can meet each other on any one of those particular stations.
I think that there's wisdom to so much of what both the panelists before me spoke. Faye's comment surprised me, and I'm being curious. And I love the fact that I was open to the fact that I've heard a lot, and the way I articulate it to people is that lawyers generally love the law, but aren't so crazy about clients and people. And that if you can go the other direction, if you can really love people and love the law, that you're really going to be a very special attorney. But that wasn't Faye's perspective at all. She was saying that is the one central tenet we all share, is that we like people. And so I think that the things that can bring us together are what has been, I'm not saying anything new, are the fact that I think that people who are attorneys and work in the law, whether obliquely or directly, love justice and want outcomes that are just and that are fair, and that is enough for all of us that so many of the ills in court and with every other thing in our lives could be decided in large part if we were just using a rubric of, is this fair? Am I being fair? Is this result fair? And if it's not, you could start from that and articulate why it's not. And judges are going to listen, and clients are going to listen, and opposing counsel is going to listen. So I really do. Believe we have these core tenets, these foundational bedrock principles of justice and fairness that make it so that no matter what we believe, I think we can not only get along, but we can also do great jobs in the courtroom and outside.
Jeff, to follow up on that, how does the legal profession benefit from having people with different viewpoints?
Um, my initial instincts are not those that are politically correct. I think that it depends very much on the viewpoints. I think that if you have diverse ideological perspectives and diverse gender and racial perspectives, that you're going to get a melange. You're going to get a pie that's bigger to decide from and choose from, and that's probably an inherent good. But there's also a lot in the world that is foolishness and error and hate and bias and prejudice, and I don't think that does add to it. And so I think that we have to have a mind towards um, getting as many viewpoints and as many people in our lives, but also being very, very discerning about principles and things that we believe and things that we need to know, and how we can be instructed in that. So I'm not the kind of person that believes that diversity in itself is a virtue. It very much depends upon what those what that diverse mixture is going to provide, and how open you are, how curious you are, and how you can. I like it also if we can sometimes curate diversity in the best way that we can to make sure that we are getting as big a perspective. And perhaps the thing that I need to do more, and maybe we all need to do more, is to be thoughtful about what we don't know, and what I might not be aware of. I may not have someone in my life because of my own siloedness or my own bias or my own prejudice, and how I can just interrogate that for myself. To me, that where we're looking at the people around us and always saying, is this person adding value? Can I learn? Can I grow? And then if I can't, you seek out more diversity. So the answer isn't less, but it's actually seeking out more so that you can have the broadest possible pool from which to dip into and get better.
Judge Harrell?
I was just thinking that, most all of these questions that we've just been discussing probably can be synthesized. I wrote a note here. I think the bottom line is, how do we preserve the dignity of the person while disagreeing about ideas? Better decisions emerge when thoughtful people challenge one another respectfully. That's been my experience. And so it doesn't really matter, which side you're on or how you think politically. Most lawyers that I know are thoughtful people, or they probably wouldn't be lawyers, quite honestly. And so you can get to a place where you can challenge each other, but you've got to do it respectfully. And that means that you have to pull the judgment out of it. You just eliminate judgment.
And with respect to this question, I think about this one film. I don't know if they still show it on law school, but it showed an accident. And it showed it from the viewpoint of like maybe 4 or 5 different people who happened to witness it. And it showed what they saw. And they were all very different views of the same thing that happened. And because our minds captured different aspects of things, according to how we're made up. And but it does But when you get all of those viewpoints out there, you get a more complete picture of what is there. And so I view this whole process of getting these other viewpoints of maybe filling in the gaps, getting a more complete view out there than what exists through your own eyes and through your own ears. To hear it from someone else's viewpoint, I think, is just enlightening. And I guess if, you know, when I think about it, the best thing I can do when I'm encountering something I never thought of is just say, well, I guess if I were in that person's shoes, I could see it that way. And I think it's just putting yourself and saying, okay, what do I see standing from this position instead? How would I view this? And I think when we do that, we do get a more complete understanding.
All right, I want to sneak this question in. We've only got 2 minutes and I still have to close, but I want to close with this just briefly. If we become less willing to have discussions like this, what does the profession lose?
We lose perspective, we lose empathy, we lose the opportunity to discover where we ourselves might be mistaken.
I'll go quickly so that Faye can have more time. I think we lose objectivity more than anything else, is that we become parochial and small in mind and in perspective, necessarily when we are not reaching out, not being curious, not wanting to know more, and not thinking that someone else could be right and might be able to instruct us as well.
Yeah, and I guess adding on to that, I think it's we lose the ability to achieve justice if we refuse to see all of the facts that might be out there.
Wonderful. Thank you, panelists, so much for your vulnerability, for your honesty. I'm so pleased. Thank you, our attendees, for attending. And our next event will be Navigating Attorney and Client Stress. That'll be on September 9th from 12 to 1. Registration can be found on our website. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.